point, ladies and gentlemen, I will go on to the third presenter for this evening's Leadership Dialogue series, Honorable Isaac Adongo. I have a very extensive bio. Permit me to cut a short, Honorable. Mr. Isaac Adongo holds a BSc Administration degree with specialization in accounting from the University of Ghana. He is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, Ghana, having qualified in November 2008 and admitted into membership in April 2009. Mr. Isaac Adongo has pursued an MBA in finance from the University of Ghana Business School with a submission of long essay outstanding. Mr. Adongo has over 16 years of progressively high level experience in general and executive leadership, products and operations management, public and private sector financial management, assurance, risk management and consulting across several sectors of the Ghanaian economy, such as telecommunication, manufacturing, mining, tertiary education, and real estate development. Mr. Adongo is an expert in donor-funded procurement and financial management systems, policies and procedures, having consulted and worked on projects funded by the World Bank, African Development Bank, OPEC Fund for International Development, the British Department for International Development, and Danida. Mr. Adongo is currently the Member of Parliament for Bolgatanga Central Constituency of Ghana's Parliament and serves on both the Finance Committee and Trade, Industry and Tourism Committee of Ghana's current Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, please let us welcome Mr. Isaac Adongo onto the podium.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be on this platform. Mine is to speak on the perspective of Parliament, particularly a member of Parliament from the Finance Committee. I have listened to the first two presenters, and they have made very, very good inputs. And so where I feel that they've already dealt with the subject, I would try to move away from it. The Center for Social Justice is an economic, socio-political think tank and CSO that was created, that has created the Leadership Dialogue series to assist in the discovery and engage in the topical conversations of our national interests. It also gathers expert opinions, views, and relevant data and information on national development through expert engagements such as ours. Today's event is the 11th in the series of the Leadership Dialogue series, aimed at taking stock of Ghana's economic crisis with a view to finding solutions for transformation of the economy. Ladies and gentlemen, the rationale for undertaking this analysis is to diagnose Ghana's economic situation before and after the outbreak of COVID and the Russia-Ukraine war, to establish the causes of the current economic crisis, and to identify the hard choices and policies that can assist the country to deal with the crisis and the path to the medium to long-term transformation of our economy, to build a modern, resilient economy. Ghanaians will notice that in recent times, some policymakers and commercial commentators have looked to the COVID-19 pandemic and the recent Russia-Ukraine war as the main cause of the ills of the Ghanaian economy. It is therefore important for today's Leadership Dialogue series to dispassionately undertake and extend and expose performance of the Ghanaian economy using key macroeconomic data from the performance of the fiscal policy, monetary policy, external sustainability, and financial stability. to determine whether Ghana's economy is a victim of the COVID-19 pandemic, Russia-Ukraine war, or pre-existing vulnerable underlying conditions, and establish the true causes of the economic crisis and find workable and enduring transformational solutions. In our Vice President's own commonly used adage, if you disagree, bring your data. Ghana's economy is facing monumental crisis with heightened and unsustainable multiple fiscal failures. Bloomberg recently posited that Ghana's fiscal wings have been clipped. Ghana is facing a debt crisis with a debt to GDP estimated at 83% at the end of 2021 by Bloomberg. Debt service to total service at 129% of total revenue at the end of 2020 by the IMF in the recently concluded the Article 4 review, which was done in 2001. It concluded that our total revenue was not enough to pay debt service, and we needed to borrow an additional 29% in order to be able to pay just debt service. Excessive budget rigidities with debt service as the singular most damaging fiscal burden, followed by a compensation of employees and statutory payments amidst low revenue generation. Monetary policy has lost credibility with key policy failures to stem price development such as spiking interest rates, record high inflation, and depreciation of the cedi. We are caught up in the fiscal and monetary policy quagmire as fiscal authority and monetary authorities have connived against the economy to create mounting fiscal dominance over monetary policy. Inflation targeting framework of the Bank of Ghana and subsequent management of inflation expectations is not only unanchored, but completely thrown to the dogs. Contrary to the belief of Ghanaians that the government only borrowed 10 billion Ghana cedis from the Bank of Ghana to finance the budget during COVID-19 in 2020, the 2021 annual debt management report makes a shocking revelations. The total exposure of Bank of Ghana to the government of Ghana, as at the end of 2021, was in excess of 35 billion Ghana cedis. In other words, by the end of 2021, government had a total debt sitting on the books of Bank of Ghana that it has to pay Bank of Ghana to the tune of 35 billion. A further 22 billion as of June 2022. This brings the total government borrowing from the Bank of Ghana to about 57 billion at the end of June 2022. This illegal borrowing from the Bank of Ghana explains why monetary policy is not credible in taking price development actions. The result of this illegal fiscal and monetary policy collusion are debilitating high interest rates that is now hurting government finances, real sector of the economy as the private sector struggles to raise credit to survive and grow the economy, deteriorating living conditions of Ghanaians resulting from loss of purchasing power and erosion of capital of businesses. It is on the basis of this that the theme for the occasion, Transforming Ghana's Economy, Scapegoats, Real Causes, and Hard Choices, is apt and commendable. I come from the Finance Committee of Parliament, and I've listened to all the conversations about the real sector of the economy, about how to transform the Ghanaian economy by focusing on the pillars of agriculture, industrialization, and service, and improving infrastructure. But the most important thing we have forgotten is that when your fiscal environment consumes all the money, then the question is, how did you build the roads? How did you provide education? How were you able to provide boreholes and develop agriculture? It will mean that clearly it will become a sloganeering because there is no money to do those activities. And so the focus ought to be that the fiscal environment provide the buffers and the space for government to undertake its development agenda. And my focus is to look at how that has happened over the period and how that can be improved, and to understand how the monetary policy authorities have worked together to complement fiscal policy, and to look at whether or not our financial sector is stable enough and is sound and robust enough to support private sector and government to deliver on this agenda. So first, I will look at some aspects of fiscal development. There is a need to take a critical look at fiscal development and how it has impacted the capacity of the country to invest in Africa in infrastructure, address or worsen rigidities in the budget, and the key drivers of fiscal risk and sustainability. Over the last couple of years, the mounting fiscal risk to the economy has largely been driven by the high proportion of tax and total revenue used to pay for compensation, debt service, and statutory payments. By the end of 2019, debt service alone was consuming about 91% of total tax revenue, with only a paltry 9% left to finance the rest of the budget. And here I'm talking about debt service, not interest payment. And my source is the World Bank's own regional economic outlook database. Those who doubt it can check. We were spending 91% as of 2019 when COVID hadn't arrived and Russia, Ukraine hadn't arrived. We were spending our money on debt service. This means that to adequately meet the full cost of non-discretionary expenditures that will have no way and will have to fund them, such as paying for workers and paying for our debt service, the government basically needed to elevate the level of public debt by borrowing in additional form so it will be able to meet this. In the face of lower revenues, this fiscal trajectory as of 2019 was unsustainable and exposed the country to depletion of fiscal buffers to withstand headwinds such as was experienced with COVID-19 and the Russia-Ukraine war. The reason you don't fill up the entire fiscal space is because you may be faced with emergencies that you have to address. But if the emergency comes and you are already having 91% of your money that you must spend on a non-discretionary expenditure like debt service, then clearly you are already doomed before it starts. These susceptible underlying conditions made it very easy for the economy to come under severe strain on the onset of COVID-19 and later the ravages of the Russia-Ukraine war. The IMF Article 4 consultation for 2020 showed that Ghana had zero cash buffers at the end of 2019 to draw on in 2020 to fight COVID-19, and actually rather grew cash buffers of some 1.4% of GDP in 2020 from COVID resources. So when COVID came, we were not prepared. As a matter of fact, we benefited from COVID. COVID helped us to rather save money for another day. That is not a prudent economic management. The generic measure of the various activities of an economy, whether in the form of output or the income that we earn, is what we call the GDP. But we know that to grow the GDP and to anchor the GDP, you must invest heavily in infrastructure. Because by investing in infrastructure, particularly in relation to the size of the economy, you are renewing the economy, you are providing the capacity for the economy to be able to expand and eliminate lack of competitiveness. As the economy grows and urbanization begins to set in, new communities emerge. And those communities must be provided with roads, they must be provided with infrastructure, they must be provided with water, and they must be provided with electricity. That is the reason why you relate your capital expenditure to the size of the economy, and not just in nominal terms. But even in nominal terms, the figure of 7.7 billion in 2016 was the highest for almost 4 years until recently. But in terms of debt, capital expenditure to GDP, we moved from 4.5% of GDP in 2016 to 1.8% by 2019. And currently we are doing less than 1% of GDP. That is how dire it is. It means we are not investing into our future. If you are not investing into your future, then it means the roads are not being built. It means the schools are not being constructed. It means that you are not providing water systems. And so when they tell you that they've constructed roads, what you hear is that they mention kilometers without pointing where the road is, because the money just simply wasn't there to construct the roads and to build the infrastructure. All of it was spent just on debt service. No wonder, ladies and gentlemen, that our education system is in a mess. Healthcare is still reliant. Ladies and gentlemen, no wonder our educational system is in a mess. Healthcare is still reliant on the facilities inherited by the administration in the face of mounting pressure on these inadequate facilities. Poorly resourced security services leading to the citizenry living in insecurity. Ghana, after experiencing alignment of capital expenditure in response to the needs of the expanding economy from 2014 to 2016, was poised for a sustained takeoff. Unfortunately, this forward march was to be rudely curtailed in response to the implementation of propaganda policies that were derived from the propaganda lectures of His Excellency Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, the then running mate of the MPP, and those lectures metamorphosed to become the MPP manifesto in 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, the famous policy of moving the economy from taxation to production died a stillbirth. One village, one dam is an example of a reckless waste of public resources. Whilst one district, one factory that was touted as the panacea to Ghana's industrial revolution became a ruse. After 2016, investment expenditures continued to decline from 2017 through to 2019, attaining the lowest dip in 2018. The figure above will show you that we were actually now around 1.8% of GDP. I'm sure Ghanaians can answer for themselves. Again, is it the case of COVID-19 that led to where we are, or poor policy choices and economic mismanagement? Part of the challenges of our fiscal regime, Mr. Chairman, is that before I delve into the discussions on the revenue and expenditure, there are a number of serious fiscal challenges that pointed to a difficult economy that we didn't take notice of right from 2018. So by 2018, government has struggled to raise revenue, and what government decided to do was to spend the revenues of our children now. So government then decided that if I can't raise the revenue, I'll go and look at get fund revenue. And I said, get fund revenue for the next 10 years. I can use it to go and collect 1.5 billion. The people who come tomorrow can decide what they want to do. They go and look at ESLA revenue. And then they say that if there's so much ESLA revenue for the next 10, 20 years, let me use it to go and raise bonds and use the rest of the money to pay the interest. Then they say that somebody has told them there is some bauxite buried on the ground. Even though they haven't seen it, they will go and collect money on account of a future exploitation of those bauxites. The cumulative effect is that today, Get Fund spends an average of 1 billion Ghana cedis a year just to service the debts. The ESLA proceeds that were raised over the period have only been used to pay interest, and the debt still remains unpaid for. There were gymnastics in trying to find another way of paying for outstanding arrears in a way that we were not able to trace them. So they'll go to a bank like Fidelity Bank and say that you should do a factoring arrangement with contractors. We'll send you the money and you pay them, and it doesn't go through the giftment. So it doesn't get reported as an expenditure of the state, and therefore suppressing the deficit that we're reporting. Now, all this coupled with poor revenue generation has led us to a point of a fiscal challenge, and our fiscal wings have now been clipped. In recent times, it's become very clear that people who have been appointed to places of authority have tended to compete against the state in order to advance their own personal interests. A case in point is what has been happening at the customs. You recently heard of some issues of advance ruling and all of that. Those are approaches that have been used to take monies away from the state without necessarily providing the resources that the government needs to work. It is quite clear that the Customs Act itself makes it mandatory for customs to provide a system that allows for pre-arrival and assessment regime, so that before your imports are even shipped, you go through that system online. And it was being operated by the NDC in 2016. We call the PAR. You put your documents through it. Customs automatically has to look at your documents in advance of your shipment and take decisions on your classifications and valuation. So advanced ruling, as has been applied, would only be necessary if there are no pre-arrival systems. If there are pre-arrival systems, it means that every single importer automatically applies by putting his document through the system to be evaluated. Why have we abandoned that? But of course, we have now used benchmark and given discounts on benchmarks. But if you read, you are a lawyer, if you read section 68, 5F of the Customs Act, it clearly tells you that customs should never use minimum custom values in order to value customs. How come they are giving discount on illegal minimum custom values that they are calling benchmark values? So clearly, people are taking advantage of the country. We have had a system also where the most important macro-fiscal entity in Ghana, the Ministry of Finance, has been turned into an investment bank and a debt processing center with over 40 employees of data bank sitting there and just doing debt processing. Quite clearly, you can't manage an economy like that because the level of expertise, the blend of expertise that you need to manage that ministry is not investment banking. That is just one. So what happens to fiscal policy? What happens to understanding the real sector and how government policies impact the real sector? What happens to making sure that you are able to understand the implications of government policy on monetary policy? What happens if we want to understand whether government action is fueling financial instability? So here, all we are doing is just raise bonds and paying debt. And it will shock you that in 2021, we went to the market to borrow a certain amount. The people were not willing to buy the bonds, but we went and tapped them and they gave us 25% more than our program. How come when we advertise, they don't come? But then later we'll go and see them in the house. They say, Chief, we have a lot of uncovered auctions. Can you give us money? And they give you money to the extent that you borrow 25% more. So are you just borrowing? Or you are borrowing because there's an objective? Then you and I are paying the interest cost of that 25% that we didn't need, but people are going home with commissions and fees for their brokerage firm, Data Bank and Black Star Brokerage. That is the situation we find ourselves in, and that must be reversed if we want to run and build an economy. There are some of the government agenda to artificially create cosmetic fiscal deficit, whilst saddling the people of Ghana with hidden debts and collapsed institutions. The truth is, you can do all the propaganda about the fiscal deficit, but the public debt and collapsing state agencies will expose you. Now, if you go to Get Fund, that fund is just collecting money and processing debt service. They can build schools. That's why our children are suffering, because all their proceeds have been collateralized. And instead of getting 2.43 billion, they get only about 600, 800 million. And that's the reason Get Fund is struggling. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenge of our economy today, from the fiscal perspective, is that we are not generating enough revenue. And even when we do, because we have opportunistically managed our economy into debt trap, we spend the money to service the debt that some people use their companies to contract for us and have taken the fees and the commissions. That is what we are spending the money on. And in the end, we don't get value for our money, like my colleague said. You remember the Almighty moving from taxation to production. It failed because if you don't have money, you cannot finance development. And if you don't have the financial model to create the enabling environment, because agriculture, industry, and all the services that we want are not driven by government. They are driven by economic agents. And those economic agents must find the economy attractive in order to put their money there and to run the economy. When you are running an economy such as us, when everything is spent on debt service, you don't build infrastructure and you don't provide the enabling environment for the private sector to thrive. How then do you grow agriculture? How do you grow industrialization? And how do you provide infrastructure? It is the main reason we are in the quagmire that we have, and that has to be addressed. The whole rhetoric on the shift from taxation to production was mere propaganda. And you recall that after they started moving from taxation to production, a few years later, 2-3 years later, they started ramping up on taxes. And in the end, the taxes they introduced took 4 billion from the people, even though the people they gave the taxes to was only 1 billion. So they gave you 1 billion in right hand. They took 4 billion in left. Unfortunately, those monies have been spent to develop the economy. We probably would have worried. it has brought us into a financial crisis, and we need to deal with that. We need to look at public debt sustainability. There has been major concerns about Ghana's public debt dynamics since Dr. Bawumia became the head of the economic management team of Ghana. In measuring and evaluating public debt and its sustainability, the focus has to be on either the quantum or size of the public debt, as well as the quality of the public debt in relation to its inherent risks to the fiscal health of the country, growth of the economy, and its impact on Ghana's external vulnerability. So when we are borrowing, you must remember that the borrowing has implications on the health of the economy, and it poses certain risks. You can't go and collect somebody's $3 billion and you are debating. Then tomorrow he's asking for his $3 billion, you say you don't have it. And when you are able to pay that $3 billion from your reserves, you have nothing to give to importers and exporters and businessmen. Obviously, your CD will collapse. And those are the changes that we didn't observe when we're always taking a lot of money. That's when Ghana's public debt grows from about 120 billion to about 400 billion in just 5.5 years. Legitimate inquiries must be made into what the monies were used for when we have very deplorable rules. Our kids in SSH are running double track systems. New hospitals have not been built, and the old ones still ill-equipped to deliver fit-for-purpose healthcare. The second question to be addressed is how the huge public debt is expanding the size of the economy and creating a pool of national income for increased revenue mobilization of the tax and non-tax related revenues to service the public debt. If you borrow to invest in the economy and you are invested in golf balls, you expect the economy to grow, then you can tax more. But what has happened to the money? We don't know. Ghana's debt to GDP shows that whilst our public debt is growing at a faster rate, the economy is not growing at the level that is required to anchor debt sustainability. And my colleague said extensively about that, so I wouldn't dwell more on it. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important for us to understand that managing an economy is about managing resilience. Managing an economy is about making sure that all the actions that we are taking do not only give a clean health of the economy, but provide impetus for growth going forward. And we say that when you talk about transformation of an economy, then you are talking about growth that is accompanied by fundamental changes to the economy or structure of the economy. When the fundamental structures of the economy accompany growth, what you get is that the growth is not reversed. What you get is that you are shock absorbers to deal with shocks. What you get is that the economy is able to provide the environment for players in the economy to be comfortable enough to grow the economy and employ people. But when you manage an economy that is based on cyclical growth, as we are seeing, but only trying to paint a picture of structural changes, you can talk about one district, one factory, and you can't point one anywhere. You just go around and paint somebody's factory that is older than this government. Based on the rate of increase in debt, the World Bank and the IMF joined the SDA analysis under the Joint Bank Fund Debt Sustainability Framework for Low-Income Countries for 2019 and published in April 2020 showed that Ghana's risk of external debt distress and the risk of overall debt distress was high. And we're in this high debt distress consecutively for 3 years. COVID hadn't arrived. I don't think Ukrainian president had angered Vladimir Putin yet. But we're at the verge of debt distress consistently for 3 years. How can you say that they're external factors? According to the report, the high risk of debt distress was due to higher projected deficit and debt service. The findings further showed that external debt service continues to absorb a third of government revenues and remains well above thresholds for most of the forecast period. The present values of external and public debt to GDP ratios exceed their threshold. This was Ghana's debt situation back in 2019 when we didn't have anything called COVID-19. In managing public debt, it is important to build adequate buffers to prepare for headwinds when they occur. The country is faced with the possibility of several external and internal shocks that may dislocate fiscal and external stability. To deal with this, the country must adequately prepare to weather the store. These factors must be analyzed to determine the quality of the country's public debt. Anytime Ghana's borrow foreign currency denominated loans will expand the country's obligation to foreign currency and must build buffers of foreign reserves to pay for these, for the interest and for the principal. It is for this reason that a country like Ghana, that has about 50% foreign currency denominated debt and a further 30% of its domestic cedi denominated debt held by non-residents who brought foreign currencies to this country, to sell to our banks and buy our bonds, will one day need their money to go back. Anytime you have a foreign currency, whether it is dollar, it is euro, or it is pound sterling in your bank account, that money is a tourist. It will go back home. So if Bank of Ghana is aware that anytime we float domestic bonds, 30% of the people, the bonds are bought by non-residents. They bring the dollars, pound sterling to their banks, sell them to their banks, and take the cedis to come and give to government. When they are going back, they can't go back to cedis. They will go back to the bank to go and look for the dollars. And that is the point where the currency will collapse if the Bank of Ghana has not built adequate foreign buffers to release to the banks so they can exit the economy. And recently they've been exiting in gross, and we don't have the currency. As we speak today, Bank of Ghana has negative net international reserves. I'm not talking just reserves, but net international reserves. If they take all our external obligations in the next 6 months, we don't have the currency to pay for it. The relationship between Ghana's public debt and export earnings, which my colleague spoke about, so I will deal with my time on it. High debt service is already dealt with. So, one key challenge we have in our country today is failed monetary policy and financial stability. The Bank of Ghana has the mandate to manage price developments to achieve stability and exercise responsibility for a sound and stable financial sector. In the last couple of years, the Bank of Ghana has failed woefully to anchor price developments. By 2019, Ghana's inflation trajectory had moved into double digits, with Bank of Ghana failing to deploy monetary policy to stem it. This was also the case with the depreciation of the cedi and interest rates. The central bank has been more of a political anchor of government and less of an autonomous technocratic monetary policy and external anchor. After the fiscal expansion in 2020 and 2021, the Bank of Ghana should have taken steps to mop up excess liquidity it failed and continue to stick to a political, nice, low policy rate. So for a very long time, when all the indications were showing that the economy was heating up, and you, the central bank, knows that you have pumped about 35 billion into that economy, and you were sitting there still keeping a low policy rate. You continue this year to pump another 22 billion. It is quite clear that that will come back to hurt the economy. So when prices are going up and we are saying that our current inflation is caused largely by supply side, then you hear the central bank pursuing demand side solution. These people, do they know something we don't know? And it's quite clear. They know that the money they have pumped, they have to call them back in. And they have pumped in excess of 35. Now, with the interest rate and the policy rate going up, the government of Ghana that thought it had gotten cheap money is now having to pay the cost of the pay your hands in the central bank. They are now having to pay almost 31, close to 31% on 91-day treasury bills. Recently, they floated 5-year and 2-year bonds. People were quoting 45%. They are abandoning it. That is the effect of taking cheap money from the central bank, because in an attempt to recall those monies, you will hurt the fiscal and you will hurt the ordinary businessman, because it's not the government that is going to borrow. The ordinary businessman will borrow and businesses will collapse. That is where we are now. In 2021, global projections and positions taken by analysts in the capital market show that there was imminent height in interest rates in developed countries, signaling an imminent return of investment to U.S. assets, but the Bank of Ghana was dead inactive. By September 2021, offshore investors had an intensified sell-off of their portfolios in emerging markets, including Ghana, but the Bank of Ghana did nothing to encourage them to lock in their funds in Ghana. As non-resident investors intensify reversals of the bond holdings, the central bank was busy throwing money at the government and throwing its limited foreign currency at them, while still keeping its biggest weapon, the policy rate, sleeping. At this point, government was struggling to raise money on the domestic market, with the central bank now busy creating more money and throwing at government instead of responding to the challenges of the withdrawals of non-resident investors. Ladies and gentlemen, by the time the Bank of Ghana woke up from its slumber and started tinkering with its monetary policy, offshore investors had left. The market was now reserved for the domestic market, and the international capital market had since shut up the door on Ghana. The end result is that the dysfunctional monetary policy, which has lost credibility, was beginning to watch on as government was beginning to bear the consequences of colluding with the Bank of Ghana to raid the safe of Bank of Ghana for illegal 22 billion, and now we know an additional 35 billion. As the saying goes, there is no free lunch. But this time, the unsuspecting private sector and households are now suffering because they can't borrow to run their businesses or live their lives. And where they find the money to borrow, they end up working for the lender because the interest rates are so high. Ghana's capital market has now collapsed with excessive yields, sometimes as high as 40%, with huge offers without base across the yield curve. So when you go on the secondary market, people are only willing to sell, nobody's willing to buy. As investors have shunned Ghana bonds and demanding outrageous yields on our domestic Euro bonds, rating agencies belatedly had to respect investment sentiments and are now all in tandem with their rating of Ghana as a junk and defaulted nation. Now, to do all of this, you will see clearly that the private sector needs a vibrant and an enabling financial sector, because that is where they can borrow money from surplus holding units. When individuals have more money, they give it to the banks, and the banks give it to the one who doesn't have now, and to pay back later. But Ghana's financial system has collapsed. Ghana's financial sector has come under enormous predatory attacks by hawks in the financial sector, who have assumed the reins of financial governance and regulatory dominance in the country. For so many years, people who struggled to compete in the financial sector and had tried to acquire certain banks and failed suddenly were entrusted with the responsibility to manage Ghana's finances and granted the license to influence the design of Ghana's financial sector regulatory architecture. In 2017, when Ken Ofori-Atta was appointed the finance minister, and senior members of his company, Data Bank Ghana Limited, began to be appointed to key regulatory institutions in the very sector where he had struggled for many years to dominate, such as the Bank of Ghana and Securities and Exchange Commission, I raised an alarm that fell on deaf ears. Ladies and gentlemen, I raised an alarm that on various platforms at that time, that by the time Ken Ofori-Atta is allowed to infiltrate the financial sector regulatory agencies with senior members of Data Bank, and with him as the finance minister, he will become the biggest risk to Ghana's financial sector. As he began to weave his and Data Bank dominance in the regulatory space, shivers ran down my spine. I knew the financial sector was on the verge of an enormous regulatory attack, and that would change the face of the financial sector for many, many years to come. Ladies and gentlemen, the master tactician, Ken Ofori-Atta, sat back at the Ministry of Finance with the public purse in hand to waste public funds in an unimaginable fashion to get this done. The founder and vice president of Data Bank and his long-term ally, Kelly Gajepo, was appointed to the board of directors of the foremost banking sector regulator, Bank of Ghana. then followed by Reverend Ogbami Tete, also a vice president of Data Bank, was appointed to the governing board of the Securities and Exchange Commission and as the Director General of this foremost regulatory agency. With Data Bank now in control of the Ministry of Finance and SEC, as well as people in the boardroom of Bank of Ghana, the stage was set for what was becoming an unleashment of terror and greed on the Ghana's financial sector. In 2017, the first leg of predatory action of this lethal force was set in motion. The Bank of Ghana announced what seemed harmless, but laden with slow poison to wipe out the financial sector in Ghana and of competitors of data banks and enterprise group, known to the and opponents known to the MPP. The Bank of Ghana revised the already announced minimum capital requirement of 230 million for banks to 400 million and requested the banks to comply with the new requirement in 1.5 years instead of 3 years. These banks were struggling to raise 330 million. They said, now we don't want 230 million, we want 400 million, but do so in 1.5 years, not 3 years. Ladies and gentlemen, as the banks were contemplating how to deal with this challenge, they appealed to the Minister for Finance to pay arrears totaling over 5.7 billion owed to contractors they finance for government projects. They indicated that the payments of the contractors will enable the contractors to pay back their loans owed to the local banks to contribute to the meeting the minimum capital requirement. Ken Ofori-Atta, now at the Bank of Ghana, it had them exactly where he wanted. Refused to pay the contractors so that they are forced by the Bank of Ghana to write off 5.7 billion of their books. Their capital became impaired and the Bank of Ghana then launched on them. At the time, a number of banks openly complained that Ken Ofori-Atta's refusal to pay them was collapsing their banks. But this rather emboldened Ken Ofori-Atta to tighten the screws on them to collapse them. As Ken Ofori-Atta continued to squeeze them, the Bank of Ghana intentionally and as part of the scheme created fear and panic in depositors. By inciting against those banks, by claiming that the banks appear not ready to meet the minimum capital several months before the deadline. This fear got worse in August 2017 when Bank of Ghana, in a Rambo style, took over, closed down, and revoked the licenses of UT Bank and Capital Bank and set a PR machine in motion to discredit the shareholders and directors of these banks to divert attention from Ghanaians uncovering the true intent of their regime plan, or their game plan, and celebration of the collapse of these entities. As the inquest raged and Ghanaians began to panic withdraw their monies from local banks, the Bank of Ghana, as usual, announced half-hearted deceptive ploy on Ghanaians. They claimed that the banks had not been collapsed, but that the banks had been assumed by Ghana Commercial Bank, and the staff of those affected would be working at Ghana Commercial Bank. The last time I heard, one of them was frying pork around Dansuma. I thought he would be at GCB, but he's frying pork. Others have died. Others have lost their families. Others' children have dropped out of school. But they believe in using a PR to deceive us. This was a grand deception because a receiver had been appointed to sell off selected assets of the banks. You appoint a receiver for a going concern. The receiver is an undertaker. When there is no dead body, you don't call the coroner. You have called in the undertaker and you say that the man is not dead. To sell off selected assets of the bank. Recover outstanding loans and pay off liabilities thereof. In other words, once the licenses of these banks were seized and a receiver was appointed for them, they ceased to be a going concern and were technically being prepared for burial by the coroner. To date, no one has cited the so-called purchase and assumption agreement, which formed the basis for the huge payout of 2.2 billion to GCB. The tragedy is that UT Bank was engaging investors willing to provide the recapitalization, but had requested to Bank of Ghana to agree to a restructuring of its liquidity support of 800 million to UT Bank for a period of 3 years as a precondition for their investment in UT Bank. That would have saved UT Bank and over 200 Ghanaian jobs and livelihoods. So you have already wasted 800 million on UT Bank in liquidity support. They can't pay you. Somebody say, I'm going to buy the bank, I'm going to put in money, but please, will you agree not to take out the 800 million and restructure it as a loan so I pay over 3 years? You say no. You take the bank, write off the 800 million against the Ghanaian taxpayer, and pump an additional 1.2 billion to waste the money. That's 2 billion gone down, a bank that could have been saved by foreigners who were willing to put their monies there. The Bank of Ghana refused, revoked the license of UT Bank, wrote off the 800 million in UT Bank. It refused to restructure to save the UT Bank and spent a further 1.2 billion to collapse it. In all, the Bank of Ghana got Ken Ofori-Atta to obtain approval from government to spend 2 billion to collapse UT Bank. To Peter, who that could have been saved at the least cost. For those who say that it's not government who collapsed the banks, but that it is Bank of Ghana, tell them no regulator will take a regulatory action that has an impact on the fiscal without fiscal authorities approving it. Because they must pay for it. So definitely you must get an executive approval, or the Minister of Finance must go to cabinet to justify for it to be approved. So you cannot say that it is Bank of Ghana that did it. The first casualty from Kukurantumi was gone. You know the whole boy is from Kukurantumi. Workers lost their jobs and livelihoods, and the banking sector received a rude awakening. The magnitude of the predatory architecture at work now. All this while, local banks were getting weaker and insolvent every day as depositors queued to withdraw their monies. For every day that the depositors withdrew their monies from the banks, they created deeper holes in their accounts and increasing the amount of monies the banks needed to cough up to meet the minimum capital requirement. So if you had already 4 billion sitting there and they are saying bring only 400 and they take the 4 billion, you now need 4.3, right? So clearly it means that you are gone. The financial sector has just begun showing all the symptoms Data Bank and Enterprise Group senior members sent to regulatory agencies were waiting to see. Insolvencies, unattractiveness of the local banks to investors. They were now available for Bank of Ghana to take as many down as possible. As the local banks bled to death, Ken Ofori-Atta refused to pay the 5.7 billion arrears owed to the clients of these banks to save them from collapse. So you owe a family money. The family comes to tell you that one of them is seriously sick. So give us some of the money to go and save that person. You refuse. Now the person dies and you appear with the biggest money they have never seen to perform a funeral. The next day they come to tell you that, hey, the other brother is also the same. Or if you don't save him now, he will die. You refuse. He dies and you come again to come and perform an elaborate funeral. Meanwhile, their monies are still there. You haven't paid. This was what was happening. As all these were going on in the banking sector, Reverend Ogbaami Tete and his Securities and Exchange Commission were also preparing a dose of poison to wipe off security-regulated companies. To do this, they first needed to ensure that Data Bank had completely insulated itself from the bomb they were about to throw at the industry. They threw the bomb in May 2018, but before throwing the bomb, Data Bank and its affiliates were going about redeeming their investment in all the financial institutions regulated by SEC before they were administered the poison by SEC. This was the same thing that happened before UT and Capital Banks were taken. They weren't taking their money. Then after Data Bank and Enterprise Group people had moved all their money to safety, Reverend Ogbaami Tete issued a bizarre directive to effect that all fund managers should go and bring all the monies they have collected from depositors and put them in account for him to come and see. Since these companies invested among themselves and with other local banks, a major panic withdrawal ensued, this time among institutional investors. Financial institutions that were generating and investing millions of excess cash every month began to experience millions of net withdrawals a month. This was not sustainable as no deposits were coming in, only withdrawals. If I want to continue with the banking sector, you will see how they wasted our 25 billion. And therefore, Bahamian should shut up talking about wasting 25 billion for the fantasies of people at the helm of government who just wanted to collapse their colleagues and grow their businesses. Some of the banks were even approved by them. Bank for Housing and Construction was approved by them. They still collapsed it. Beige Bank was approved by them. They collapsed it. But what is even bizarre is that they had made an attempt through the vice president of Data Bank in charge of corporate finance to acquire Beige Bank. When the young man refused, a couple of months later, the man who was leading the negotiation with Data Bank for the bank appeared with the Bank of Ghana to take the bank. Babatunde Ampa. Was he working at Bank of Ghana? No. But Babatunde Ampa led the team of Bank of Ghana to go and take Beige Bank. And when he was consolidated, he became the executive director in charge of Beige Bank. What has happened to us? You have no idea. People have suddenly become schoolboys. Very rich people in our society who were examples for us when it comes to entrepreneurship are today, they can't even come to their country. Heritage Bank, one of the best banks in terms of systems and liquidity. No problem at all was taken on flimsy excuses that the owner or the majority shareholder of that bank was in court. Since when did being in court amount to not being fit for purpose or not being fit to own a bank? But that is what happened in our country. Ladies and gentlemen, the banking sector debacle, the extent of the regulatory attack, and the profiting of these collapse by agents of government who had done everything possible to destroy the once famous colleagues of theirs that they could not catch up with, is going to be a scar on the conscience of our country for a very long time. In several years earlier, the government of Ghana had taken a deliberate step to encourage Ghanaian ownership of financial institutions in Ghana. We wanted to be the Zenith banks that will also go to other countries by hand-holding them and growing them. We wanted to be the Access banks. We wanted to be the Bank for Africa. Where is Beige Bank now? The young man, what's his name? Yinaku. He's gone. UT Bank, a pace setter and a revolutionary. That man, what's his name? He's gone. GN Bank. I could see now if you see his beard, he'll pity you. Seydou Adongo, gone, a young man. Never should we give power to people who raise an arrow on us. And that is what happened to us in the banking sector. And I want to come to the very difficult task. Having established the importance of the financial, monetary, and fiscal systems to anchor the transformation that you desire and the transformation that the Minister of Finance, the lady, espoused, you need to have a very sustainable fiscal environment. You need to have a monetary policy regime that provides stability in interest rates, inflation, and the depreciation of the currency. But also you need a financial system that is robust to meet the various sectors of the economy. So you notice that we used to have not just banks, we used to have SEC companies, they are gone. We used to have savings and loans, they are gone. We used to have microfinance, they are gone. You can't run an economy like that because not all of us can access the banks. And you all know that there are some people, when they get to the bank, they remove their slippers before they enter. You know that. So transforming the Ghanaian economy. I have indicated that my perspective is to look at how to anchor the various elements that I have discussed, the fiscal policy framework, the monetary policy framework, and ensure financial stability in order to provide the engine of growth and create the enabling environment. But it is also important that in achieving that, the government of Ghana has to think about a number of policy choices that it has to make. But to make those policy choices, there must be funding in order to actualize them. It has been established that Ghana's economy has been badly exposed by its heightened fiscal risk, struggling financial sector, external vulnerability, debt crisis, and monumental monetary policy failures. To transform Ghana's economy, we need to make hard choices to provide enduring short-term resuscitation and stability and forge a medium to long-term sustainability and an outlook as a key impetus to transformation of the economy. We must survive to live. So in the short term, we must get out of this problem so that we have the peace of mind and the presence of mind to do the things for medium to long term. The focus should be to resolve the current economic challenges as soon as possible and introduce reforms that will anchor stability and change the fundamental structure of the Ghanaian economy. These choices should lead to efficient monetary policy dynamics to anchor price development such as inflation, interest rates, and the currency depreciation. The fiscal environment should be reformed to anchor debt sustainability, complement monetary policy, and promote financial sector stability. The key interplay of fiscal sustainability, efficient monetary policy, and financial stability should balance capital market efficiency and external sustainability. In the long term, deliberate policy choices have to be made to place emphasis on modernized and technological-driven large-scale agriculture and integration to agribusiness to drive industrialization, enhance service delivery to support agriculture industrialization, and deliberate Ghanaian value-driving natural resource governance architecture, which we spoke extensively about on the environment extractive industry. So our natural resource governance architecture has to be improved. To achieve this, the fiscal, monetary policy, and financial capital market activities must be engineered to support agriculture, industry, services, and deliver modern infrastructure, while protecting social spending and social protection. Again, our guest speaker dealt a lot with that subject. Unfortunately, and here again you dealt with this, unfortunately our planning and development framework has become extremely fragmented, medium-term, and partisan, as we have tended to govern by party manifestos and not by a long-term national vision and plan. We need to go back to a national discourse on a national development plan that would inform medium-term and annual budgets and policy choices. We have the medium-term budgets that we have been using. They are not helping us. I'm sure years back we were hearing Ghana Poverty Reduction Strategy 1 under Kufuor, then Ghana Poverty Reduction Strategy 2, still under Kufuor and partly under Mills. Then Mills we then realized that yes, we have achieved growth, but there were inequalities. A lot of people were not contributing to that growth and were simply very poor, and we needed to carry them along. So we did the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda. It still didn't work. Agenda 1, Agenda 2 didn't work. Now we have a coordinated program of social and economic, it won't work. Because they must be coming from a long-term vision. You cannot say that I want to be somewhere only in 5 years. No. And yet we are borrowing, like he said, 40 years, 30 years. And recently, if the market has not saved us, we would have borrowed 100 years and come to say a century bond, the first country in Africa. The first country in Africa to misbehave. How can you go and borrow 100 years? Unfortunately, our planning and development framework, as I've said, has not helped us, and we need to take a look at it. My proposal for transforming the economy of Ghana will be based on 4 pillars of reforms. These include reforming the planning framework, as I've said, so that we have a long-term plan that teases into medium term, and our annual budget will now be implementing the medium term. We need fiscal reforms to support fiscal and debt sustainability. We need investment reforms to accelerate infrastructure development, ease budgetary pressures, and focus on equipping and funding and regulatory investment in industry, natural resources, strategic services sectors to improve and transform the economy. Monetary policy and financial sector reforms to ensure effectiveness efficiency, transparency, and credibility. So let me look at the budgeting and planning framework, which has already been discussed, except to say that as part of our annual budget framework, I propose a major reform to improve transparency and stakeholder engagement in the formulation of the national budget. Currently, members of parliament basically engage in a talk show. They bring us the budget, which is both the economic policy and programs, and then the estimates, allocations, and appropriation. Then we get up and display knowledge. But that policy document is not going back. It will leave Parliament the way it came. That is not acceptable. Our inputs must find expression in a revised policy and program that will inform allocation to the budget. Because we represent Ghana. So if Ghanaians in Parliament are saying that this is where we want the focus to be, so be it. But we are not given that opportunity. We just get up and we show knowledge and bravado and know each other. And after that, we go back to the committee. So there is a document prescribed by the Public Financial Management called the Fiscal Strategy Document. The Fiscal Strategy Document is a document presented by the Minister of Finance, which encompasses the economic policies, programs, and the various interventions that the government wants to pursue. This document is presented to Cabinet. Cabinet debates it, make appropriate changes, and it informs the budget that will be developed. And that then becomes the basis of the budget circular that is sent out to ministry, department, and agencies and stakeholders to input. That document, when it is approved by Cabinet, represents the economic policy. It must proceed to Parliament to be debated separately, and the input of Parliament captured and reported back to the executive before it is finalized for the budget process to start. In that case, we don't need to debate the economic policy again. All that we now do is to test whatever we did against the allocations and estimates and the appropriations. And if we are comfortable, the approval is done. We need to do that. Now, that document comes with another critical document that addresses all the confusion we're having. The fiscal risk statement. The fiscal risk statement would have told us the mess our economy is in. And therefore, we would have known where we are long time. If you allow the man causing the mess to be keeping that document, you will never get that document until they leave power. So it must accompany the fiscal strategy document to Parliament so that parliamentarians know how you are endangering the health of the economy and taking the appropriate decisions to support you correct those matters. So that is one key reform that I propose must happen. My second proposal has to do with how to deal with the debt question. Of course, the immediate solution we need to pursue is to begin to look at our budgetary framework and reset the fiscal framework. By that, I mean that there are expenditures within the fiscal regime that we need to cut off immediately in order to save us trouble. We have budgeted 1 billion Ghana cedis to be given to the Minister of Finance and the other government obligations for him to now decide which ministry to give to. And they call it Ghana Cares. They've been saying this for 3 years. I don't even know what it is. We must remove that money. It must be cut now, 1 billion. This so-called U-Start will end up the same way NABCO has ended. It's a waste of resources. It cannot be allowed. That must also cut. We'll have another 1 billion. Even in the midst of the difficulty, the Minister of Finance has also picked another 1 billion that he says he's going to give it to Ghana Amalgamated Trust, to go around buying people's businesses. What is the business of government buying other businesses? That must disappear immediately. If you look into the budget and you take your time to analyze the budget, this government can cut 10 billion Ghana cedis now. But you see, when they put it there, people are looking at the 10%. So how would they cut it? The ministry money is not released. You go to the Ministry of Finance to ask for your money. They say, what do you want? If you mention, okay, call a better amount. Are you the procuring agency? That must end. That will help us to create buffers in our budget and reduce the deficit significantly in order that we don't ramp up our debts. But we must have a sustainable vehicle for paying off our debts. We cannot keep rolling them over. The guest speaker spoke extensively about the ABFA, the annual budget funding amount from oil. That's a useless vehicle, if you ask me. Can you go out, or have you ever heard of any major project we have used oil money to do for the past how many years? It's a wasted vehicle. It doesn't make, in fact, we just came from Koforia, and we got to know that they are even using it to pay judgment debt. We must review the Petroleum Revenue Management Act in order to realign the flows into the Petroleum Revenue Management Act into the sinking fund and only leave the heritage fund for the future. If we are able to do that, we can generate close to $100 million a year to pay our offshore debt obligations, which has the implication of reducing the exchange risk on our budget and also reduce our debt service. It will reduce the interest payment because you no longer owe that money. And over 5 years, we can generate $5 to $6 billion to pay off a significant part of that debt and bring us to in line with debt sustainability. Whatever we lose in ABFA, we gain in the fiscal space that will be created when we have paid off a significant part of the money and we no longer are required to pay the interest that we are paying now. I know that will be a difficult challenge, but difficult decisions are taken in difficult times. We must review that law. But also we must review, if we are going to put that money in a sinking fund, we must review the transparency and accountability mechanisms of the sinking fund in the Public Financial Management Act. So that the minister doesn't tell you that I put it in the sinking fund, I'm going to use to pay debt, and then he uses it to go and pay for something else. We must provide safeguards. But finally, how do we finance transformation of the economy going forward? How do we finance infrastructure? How do we finance healthcare? How do we finance industrialization? How do we finance all the things that we want to do that will create a modern, resilient economy? I believe that we must focus on tapping the potential of investment, both foreign and domestic investment. Currently, I see the Ghana Investment Promotion Center as an orphan in the house of a polygamous family whose father doesn't even know his children and the potential of the children. It is sitting at the office of the president. The president has too many things to do. He's busy thinking about how to fly the next jet. And you say he should look after Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. I propose that immediate action be taken to consolidate a number of the ministries that we think can be done by one person and create a new ministry for investment, PPP, and infrastructure development. Transform the Ghana Investment Promotion Center into an investment authority and put it under that ministry. Move the Free Zones Board into an authority and bring it under that to use it to promote free zone activities and export-driven activities. Bring the Mineral Income Investment Fund to that ministry to earmark money for financing our natural resource exploitation and governance, and increase our stake in our gold exploration, increase our stake in our bauxite exploration, and increase our stake in all the minerals that are dear to us. Instead of thinking about how to sell the revenues for 20, 25 years in minerals royalties, thing they call Ajapa. The Mineral Income Investment Fund should be brought under the Ministry for Investment, PPP, and Infrastructure Development to anchor government's investment in mineral exploration. We currently have almost over 3.5 billion sitting in an idle bank account under MIF. How can you do that to yourself? Because some people are waiting for that money to become part of a Japa. That money must be invested properly. Now, when we do that, we can also bring the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund under that investment company to explore the possibility of partnering foreign investors to develop our infrastructure. I cannot see why Ghana Investment Infrastructure Fund cannot partner a private sector to build and dualize the road from Accra to Kumasi. We are not saying go and collapse the existing road. You build a new, complete new road, 6 lanes, 7 lanes, 8 lanes to Kumasi, and it is owned by Ghana Infrastructure Investment and a private entity. Those who want to get to Kumasi in 2 hours, go and use it and pay for it. And you will see that it will pay for itself. And the money the government would have used in the budget to fund that project will be available to fund social spending. And several roads can be targeted. You can target Accra Takrady. You can target Accra Ho, Accra Aflao. You can target Kumasi, Tamale, Bolgatanga, Paga. You can target Kumasi to Sunyani and make it a business activity that the private sector can undertake. But make sure that government of Ghana has made resources available through a vehicle to participate in that investment. So that after 4 or 5 years, when we have attained debt sustainability, the 1 billion to 2 billion that we are putting into the sinking fund should be channeled into these financing agencies to scale up infrastructure development and the transformation of our economy. You can decide to put part of that money into agriculture if you decide to use Exim Bank. You can do irrigation facility. We did one in Tamni. If you go to Tamni, a modern irrigation facility constructed by John Dramani Mahama, which has brought over 20,000 acres of land under cultivation and producing vegetables that will save us a lot of money. So Exim Bank funded it, and they can do it. On this note, ladies and gentlemen, the path to recovery will be difficult, but it must be done. But having done that, we must begin to think long-term and act short-term. It is the only way out of the crisis so we can deliver a country that is transformed to our children and our grandchildren and be proud that we're entrusted with authority to deliver for our country. Thank you very much.